Hey guys, this is Prasid Banerjee from Digit.in and we are reviewing the Yu Yutopia smartphone today. It is the newest smartphone from Micromax's sister concern Yu, and it is the most powerful phone that the brand has ever created. So before I even get on with the review, I'm going to answer a few questions that have been asked of us by many of you. The first one of course being, does the Snapdragon 810 processor on this phone heat up? The answer to that is no. Yu has done a pretty good job in terms of thermal control through its algorithms, and even though it is done only through software, it is being done pretty well. Second question to answer would be, would I personally choose the Yu Yutopia over the OnePlus 2 having used this phone? And my answer to that question would be no. I do not particularly like the design of this phone, which I will explain later, and there are too many bugs in the software, which also you will learn through the course of this review. The third question would be, what is the key takeaway from using the Yu Yutopia? The answer to that would be that Micromax and its sub-brand Yu are a force to be reckoned with, and they will not be taken lightly. The last question that I would like to answer is, what are the key strengths and weaknesses of the Yu Yutopia? So the strength of course is its 21 megapixel camera, and its main weakness surprisingly is Cyanogenmod, which is quite buggy, and there are a lot of things that need to improve. Let's get on with the review. What I'll talk about at first is the build quality. Like I mentioned, I do not really like the design of this phone, and the reason for that is simply because it's a 5.2-inch device which is too big and too unwieldy to hold. The Yu Yutopia is wide, which means that with its rounded sides, I can't really use it with one hand. I'm not saying that there are a lot of phones in the market that are easy to use, but the point is that a 5.2-inch device could easily have been more compact and more easier to use. If you add to that the fact that there's a full metal construction, it is a little slippery because of that. And another thing is, this is not the kind of metal that you get on a HTC or an Apple phone. This metal will dent the first time you drop it from your hand, and that is something I don't really like. Overall though, if you talk about the looks of the phone, that is a point where I won't really may have any qualms with this phone, because the all metal build looks good, and while some people will have a problem with this camera bump, I personally do not think it does anything to the phone. In fact, I think this spherical camera module that Yu has put does look quite good, and it gives the phone its own personality for that matter. Overall, looks wise, I don't mind the Yu Yutopia, but if you're asking about the simple design, I would still go for the OnePlus 2, because even though it is bigger, it is in a lot of ways easier to use than this phone. Moving on to the display, it has a 5.2-inch QHD display, which automatically gives it a much higher pixel density than the OnePlus 2 or the Honor 7, both of which are its main competitors in the market. But having said that, I did run into some Cyanogenmod bugs, which I'm going to explain soon. Speaking of the bugs, if you talk about Cyanogenmod on this phone, it is really buggy. There have been times when the UI just gets stuck for no reason, and there have been times when it runs really smooth. You can choose between a lot of customization options, and there are a lot of things you can do to the UI, but the problem is that it still remains buggy. Once we turned on the adaptive display and the screen just wouldn't go back to the regular. We turned the adaptive display mode on, but there was a yellowish tint on the screen, and we finally had to reset the phone in order to remove it. That is not something you would want to do. I had to re-download about 15 GB of data, which is not something you would want to do. There are also other bugs. For example, the fingerprint sensor almost never recognizes the fingerprint. About 85% of the times this fingerprint sensor fails to recognize, and that is not something that is quite acceptable in this day and age. So the UI has a lot of bugs. There are more that I'm not talking about right now, and I'm sure there are some that I haven't even faced yet and I may face in the future. So UI wise, I'm not really fond of this phone. The strength of this phone though, as I mentioned before, is its camera. The 21 megapixel camera on this phone can take some really stellar shots. If you ask me, these are some of the best shots that we have seen in phones in a long time. But having said that, the Yu Yutopia also has a tendency to desaturate images in some light conditions, and that is something that some may not like. The camera is especially good when it comes to low light imaging. Under low light, the Yu Yutopia is pretty good at reducing the noise, providing really sharp pictures and really bright pictures, which is something you do need. So low light wise and even in bright sunlight and otherwise, the Yu Yutopia's images are really nice. Yes, it desaturates images sometimes, but they are usually in very unevenly lit conditions, and that is something that not a lot of you will face. In fact, it did desaturate images once under studio lighting, but then again, it's not really something that happens always, and I'm pretty sure desaturating also has to do with the amount of light and the way the light is coming. Overall, this is a camera that you can be happy with. You can point and shoot and you do not have to process images. One qualm I do have with the camera though is that the Yu Yutopia is pretty slow to focus. It does well with the shutter delay, there's no problem with that, but it does take some time to focus, and that's something you may not like, especially if you're a flagship lover. The OnePlus 2 is much faster than this, and the overall camera quality is pretty much the same in all three of these devices, including the Honor 7 of course. Lastly, the battery on this phone is a 3000 mAh battery, and that should make for good battery life. The Yu Utopia's battery life is more or less the industry average today. If you're a real power user, you'll get about 7 to 8 hours out of this phone, and if you are a more basic user, you can stretch it to about 12 hours if you want to. And there are also battery savers and things that you can do to enhance your battery life a little more. In fact, I keep my displays on full brightness all the time, which means that in any given circumstance, you can get almost 30% more power from a phone than I can because of the high brightness on the screen. So overall, the battery life is definitely not something that you will not like. It's not a full day battery life, it will not last you 24 hours, but 12 hours, 14 hours is something that most people can do with. So if you ask me whether the Yu Yutopia is a good phone, yes, it is a good phone. It's the best phone that Micromax or Yu has ever created. But is it better than the OnePlus 2? I would say not, and the reason for that is simply that the UI is not optimized enough. It's not just about the bugs. The OnePlus 2 also came with a lot of bugs. Oxygen OS was quite buggy, but then again the Yu Yutopia has bigger bugs and there are more bugs, if I dare say. What's more important though is the software implementation on the OnePlus 2. The OnePlus 2 software enhances the GPU's performance. It enhances the entire phone's performance. You can take two phones with the same processor, the Snapdragon 810, but it will be the software that will determine which phone performs better, and in this case it is the OnePlus 2. It's actually very evident when you look at the GFX benchmark. The fact that the Yu Yutopia cannot run the new car chase benchmark under GFX bench is an indicator of that, because the Sony Xperia Z5, which is as powerful and has lesser RAM than this, can run that car chase benchmark without any glitches. Yes, it doesn't run it at the best of its capabilities, of any GPU's capabilities, but then it does run the whole thing. The Yu Yutopia runs out of memory in about 2 to 3 seconds after running the benchmark. Even on regular benchmarks, you'll understand that the Yu Yutopia is underpowered, and the reason for that is a lot because of the software. The aggressive thermal control algorithms come into play very fast. So if you start playing a game within about 5 to 6 races on Need for Speed No Limits, I could see the throttling affecting the phone, and that is what makes this a less powerful phone than say a OnePlus 2. So if you're planning to buy this, you simply have to answer one question, and the question is, are you okay with the bugs? Are you okay with trusting Micromax to send an OTA update and solve all these bugs and improve the performance? If you are, then this is definitely not a bad buy, but otherwise the OnePlus 2 is a more powerful phone, and the Honor 7 would be more stable than both the OnePlus 2 and the Yu Yutopia.